Upgrades.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another JVS movie review. Today we are bringing you the latest from Focus Films, and this one is called Liza Frankenstein. And here's a quick synopsis: a misunderstood teenager and a animated, or reanimated, I should say, Victorian corpse embark on a murderous journey together to find love, happiness, and a few missing body parts. And this one is directed by Zelda Williams. It stars Kathryn Newton as Lisa Swallows and Cole Sprouse as the creature. That's all he's known as in this film, is as the creature. Let's start off with saying that Lisa Frankenstein is very reminiscent of the 80s horror comedies of past. Lost Boys immediately comes to mind. Fright Night immediately comes to mind. Even in a sense of tone or attempted tone, like Gremlins, things of this, the creatures, these type of films where while they were supposed to be horror films, they had a lot of comedy added into it to help engage the audience. And Lisa Frankenstein attempts to emulate these films in that stance. But unfortunately for Lisa Frankenstein, the biggest flaw of this film is that the main character, played by Kathryn, is one of the most unlikable characters in film in the last couple of years. As we're introduced to Lisa, we're introduced to her as she's just at the gravesite of a Victorian corpse, and she's just etch a sketching Lisa Frankenstein, and that's where we get the introduction to the film. And then we get to know more about Lisa, and we find out that her mother was horrendously murdered, and her father has remarried, and now she has a new family, and they've moved, and is about being accepted in this new town. So now we understand that she's using this gravesite as an escape from her reality in a way where she can feel more at peace with her new surroundings. That for some odd reason, this gravesite brings her a lot of comfort. And then we get a party, which happens in these type of films. And after that party, we get a huge storm that happens, and then we get a corpse that's reanimated. And as odd as that all sounds, the pacing of it is just as odd in the film. At times, this film moves extremely slow, but then it speeds up way too much at key moments where you will want to have more explanation on why this gravesite is important to her. Why is this corpse reanimated? Like, none of that is fully shown or told to the audience. Everything is left up to your own interpretation about these events and what's happening in this film. But once we get the corpse reanimated, it just becomes silly, like overly silly here, as the creature, again played by Cole, is mute at a point, missing a few body parts. But it doesn't take any of the premise of the original Frankenstein and how much you understood how tortured this character Frankenstein was. In this film, instead, it he just seems to be a bubbling corpse that goes on murders rampages at times for no apparent reason. Nothing that can ever be fully explained here. And as the bodies piled up in the film, we never fully grasp the gravity of Lisa's situation here with this corpse, as she too quickly goes into a true romance type of story here with the creature, and it just never feels believable. So, along with the character not being likable, the story's not believable. It's not paced in a way where it can engage an audience. So we're stuck in a film that looks amazing. It looks spot on to what you expect from 80s horror comedies, but nothing else feels the same way. A lot of those 80s horror comedies had so much heart in it, or at least you cared about the characters enough where you can leap over certain plot issues that those films would have. Here with Lisa Frankenstein, because it's paced bad and because the characters aren't likable, it the plot issues of this film just mounts more and more and more as we see the bodies pile up, as we see what seems to be a growing love story between the two, but Lisa's also pining for a completely different person. It gives you so much story that doesn't make sense. that it can leave, or it will definitely to me leave an audience truly wondering, what are you sitting through? So if you're here just for the visuals, it looks great. It looks very retro. I think it fits that mold perfectly. But everything else in this film doesn't work properly. And because of that, you're left with a feeling that this movie should have never been made. And that's hard to say because we understand, even through the direction of it, just how much care is put into this film. But you have to wonder, with a character like Lisa in this film and her not being likable, if you just missed the mark here. If you could have just went a straight horror route with this film, I think it could have worked. If you would have went just straight comedy, possibly could have worked. But to try to mix those two elements together, it really hurts this film. Like at times when we get to the kill moments of this film, they feel so misplaced, so random, and there's no consequences really for any of these murders that happen. There's no real cover-ups of people that are just randomly missing for some weird reason, and we just brush it off as absolutely nothing. And that is a huge issue with this film. Is I don't think they fully grasp what the vision that they wanted to go with Lisa Frankenstein. So instead, it leaves up everything to an audience's interpretation on what this movie should be. And unfortunately, when you get to that point of it, you gotta break down the film, and then you're stuck with wondering exactly what am I watching here. But from a direction standpoint, it looks great. I love the 80s score to it. I love the cinematography of it. I love everything in this film besides the plot, the pacing, and the story. Those are bad. Those are extremely bad. I think Kathryn and Cole do a good job with these characters. I don't think it's the actor's fault that these characters are not likable. I just think that's the way they're written. And I think that was a missed opportunity. You could have had something that could become a cult classic, but instead, this is a film that will be forgotten in 2 or 3 weeks. No one will ever remember this film came out because it doesn't feel like it has a rewatchability with it. It just feels like a film you sit through and you're like, oh, that's it. And that down to the way we get to Frankenstein's monster in this film, and we get them collecting body parts for him, and the way they do the electrifying of the monster for these body parts to be reanimated, it is super comical. And because it's so comical about what happens and how this happens, I think it can really take you out of this film. Because again, Lisa is supposed to be playing kind of Dr. Frankenstein. But when you're playing her as Dr. Frankenstein, as a teenage girl who's troubled, and you don't really go into her troubled story, which I think could have brought the necessary sympathy out the character, that could have made the story better. But without that backstory really being this just thrown in there, it's talked about what happened to her and what happened to her mom and a tragic moment she went through. But because we never see the character really go through it or suffer through it or even explain the feelings about it, it just feels misplaced, or it just feels like a plot point that's just thrown in there to help you understand what Lisa's going through in this film. So, Lisa Frankenstein, brought to you by Focus Films. Out of a possible 10, I am going to give Lisa Frankenstein a 3 out of 10. It looks great. Definitely looks great. But that's about it. Like, it gives you everything you can want in an 80s horror comedy besides story, plot, and acting. But that's not the actor's fault. I just think the characters aren't likable at all. And this is a film that I'm pretty sure when it was made, people thought possibly while it wouldn't have an initial big audience, that it could venture into that cult classic area. But the characters just aren't likable enough for that to happen. And the story is just so silly and misplaced. The kills are some of the worst kills I've seen in recent horror films, including any other horror comedy film. Like, these kills make no sense, and most of them are just too silly, down to the third act where the monster, the creature, just goes completely off the wall on the things that's happening. And the story of it just ventures into something that just becomes a ball of mess. And as a viewer, you're left to attempt to separate what actually works in a film and what doesn't work in this film. But the point that you have to separate that while watching the film tends to be a problem here. It just doesn't feel like it has a clear direction on what this story needs to be successful. But check it out. Let us know what you think. Lisa Frankenstein is currently in theaters. This has been another JVS movie review. Peace, people.